Welcome to the Practical Church Revitalization Podcast with our co-hosts Don McKinnon and Eric Malloy, where we look at church revitalization in real time.
You ready?
Yeah. Okay, welcome to the first episode of the Practical Church Revitalization Podcast. I'm Don McKinnon, and with me is my podcast partner.
Hi, I'm Eric Malloy. I have to stand about 100 miles away, so in case I get quiet, make sure I apologize. I have a kind of a loud voice. So, really excited. We've been talking about this thing for a couple months, so it's fun to finally be able to do this.
Yeah, this has been something that has been 3-4 months in planning. It is something that we are actually on the ground floor of. Revitalization is something that nationwide churches and denominations are starting to really take notice of and see the reality that churches need revitalization. 90% of the churches out there are under 100 or more people.
I think it'd be under 100 or less.
Yeah, 100 or less. But that is the reality of church these days. And in a day and age where the celebrity pastor and the church planting, it has really over the last decade and a half probably caught on fire. This is the reality. There are churches that are dying, that have plateaued, and they need to fall in love with Christ again. So without further ado, we're just gonna introduce ourselves. Eric, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'm Eric Malloy. I'm the lead pastor at First Church in Charlestown, Massachusetts. I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and we were buying Easter eggs for next year's Easter egg hunt at Target, and they thought we were from Charleston, South Carolina, or Charlestown, Rhode Island, and I said, no, Charlestown, Massachusetts. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a neighborhood in Boston. It's actually the oldest neighborhood in Boston, and it's like 1 square mile. Our church dates back to 1632. It actually dates back to 1629, but we didn't actually become a church till 1632. Our third pastor was John Harvard, so he was actually, this is his last pastorate, and then he donated his estate and his books to the college, which would then, of course, become Harvard, as we know now. Been here for almost 3 years. I had to think about that the other day. It kind of caught me off guard. And we were I don't know how much more you want. I mean, we were a church in decline. We had about 8 people in attendance my first Sunday who weren't the people that I brought. It was a church we were, had kind of lost any real direction. No real doctrine, no real focus, no real mission, vision. I think they've been rolling with interim pastor for about 6 or 7 years now, and he showed up. One of the guys who's been here his whole life. Him and I were joking about that. Our service starts at 10, so he'd show up about 9:57 and be out the door by 11:05. So
That's not good.
So since then we've really we worked hard to be part of the community. We've grown. We probably run about 30 or 35. Which is fine. I mean, that's a great number. The number I'm more excited is that we actually grew enough that we had to multiply community groups. So we actually have 2 small groups that meet during the week. So that's really exciting for me. That's the exciting part, because you just kind of see people growing and growing in their faith and stuff. But more. I mean, I guess if you know, I mean, I come from a church planting background. I was part of a church plant the first time in 1999, which is the pastor from that, we joke that's like the dark ages. Nobody really knew what to do with us. I mean, when I told my family, they were like, "Did you join a cult?" We planted a church in Washington State, in my wife's hometown, kind of in a more rural to suburban area, not in a city like Boston, and so we moved to Boston to church plant, and funny, it's often how God has other plans for us. So we ended up here, which is where we're at right now. By the way, we're recording from what we're going to affectionately call the bunker, because we're in Charlestown, and you can actually see the Bunker Hill Monument from my office. It's pretty cool. We're not my office, but we're in the bunker because we wouldn't fit in my office because it's like the size of a glorified closet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah, I noticed that when I got off the sub today, I was like, I'm like coming off, and I like turn over, and I see First Church right off there with Bunker Hill, and I was like, I gotta take a picture of this.
it's a really cool picture. We're only a couple blocks away. If you go up to the top of the hill, up to Bunker Hill Street, and you walk like 2 blocks down. I mean, I think I can walk there in like 6 minutes. I don't walk particularly fast if I can help it. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually. We have a Facebook page for those of you who are out there, and I will actually put a picture of what I saw right when I got off the T, as we call it here, affectionately in Boston. The T. I am Don McKinnon. I guess it's time for me to kind of tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up, I am a third generation pastor. My grandfather on my mother's side was an Anglican preacher. He was licensed through the Anglican Church. He was a chaplain in the U.S. Army. He served the Lord many years until the Lord saw fit to take him home. My dad, he was an Assemblies of God pastor. Served the Lord faithfully many, many years. Actually, when I was in Bible school, he would be my sounding board, the person that I could really go out there and talk to and just bounce the challenging ideas that college was throwing at me. And then for the last, for 20 years I've been in ministry. The first 11 I served as a youth pastor at a little church in Easton, Massachusetts. Served there. Eventually, the elders and leadership there thought I should, as I was finishing school, go off and find some other place to grow a little bit. I landed in a church plant in Taunton, Mass., where my wife and I currently live, and we ended up serving there for 7 years. I served in ministry on the pastoral team there for the 7 years, and then took a sabbatical. And during that time, God opened my eyes and my wife's eyes up and our hearts up to want to find a church. And we had actually been challenged to think about revitalization by a pastor of a church in Taunton that works with Overseed, which is a network that Eric and I are both affiliated with. And little by little, we found this little church in Sutton, First Baptist Church of Sutton, and about 4 months of talks and meetings and preachings and questions and answers, and they decided to call me to be the pastor there. We started with 6 people. We currently have about 18 people, give or take, on any Sunday. It's not that you're going to have all 18 there, but that is the life of church these days. But we've tripled in size, and it's good. It's going good. We have one small group going currently, and we actually do once a month. We do a men's and women's ministry type thing, a men's breakfast and a women's luncheon, and it's been pretty good. Like they're growing. That's the biggest thing, is that they are growing spiritually. The same thing as Eric was saying. The pastor was showing up just about 10 minutes before they were supposed to have service, and this was the pastor that was there 20 years. He just was tired and looking to retire, and the church had dwindled from about 40, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, down to the 6 that we had started with. But now we're starting to grow, and that's...
Well, and let's be honest with that. When it comes to revitalization, you come from a church plant, I come from a church planting world. You get the outside funding sometimes. We actually never had outside funding, but you're always looking to try to catch outside funding. And people always want to know about your numbers. That's a big thing.
The ABCs.
Right. The big thing about it, and it's at least with a plant, you have an attractional thing going on. People come in, it's something new. You have at least when we planted, we had a full band. It was a lot more like a rock concert, if I'm going to be completely honest. I mean, there's definitely things I do differently. But what's his name? Mark Clifton says it well. Is the issue is that in a replant, you're not going to get that low-hanging church fruit. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to get those like people from other churches or people with a church background looking for a church. They're not going to walk in and go, "Man, this is incredible." I mean, we've had a couple of those. But we're not going to attract people. I mean, if you have people who are looking for something more attractional, they're going to go somewhere else because, like, we're just, we don't look that way. I mean, our building's older, so is yours.
Mine's older.
Yeah, your building is older. But I mean,
you got the older congregation.
Right.
I got the older building.
Right. Yeah, our building only dates back to 1849. Our first one burned down in the Battle of Bunker Hill. So, but I mean, that's the thing. They come in there and it looks older. We've done a lot of work, and so we've updated a lot. Our sanctuary
It's
still
looking great out there.
Yeah, we're trying. Our sanctuary still looks older, but it's getting there. We have our floors in bad shape, and we got a couple other big projects to do. But
like Clifton has said many times, as revitalization is taking off in America, the seminarians that are graduating, these students that are graduating Bible colleges and looking for their first pastorates, they're being attracted to these mid-century buildings, and that's what this is. This was redone in the 50s, so it fits there. I didn't get to see your pews live, but I've seen the pictures, and those definitely were 50s pews.
Oh my gosh! So those of you who don't know, so Don's actually sitting. We're at the bunker, so we're at First Church. And Don's like sitting here. He was talking about the monthly event. We have a monthly men's breakfast, and he came out from the sticks to visit us. So we ate about 8 piles of bacon each. And if my wife listens to this, I only had 3 pieces because I'm trying to be healthy. For everybody who's listening, I'm totally lying. Sorry,
He's
Sarah.
being facetious.
But we enjoyed it, and another church was had come to pick up our pews. We sold them. Mostly just because we have a missions team coming this summer to help us redo our floors, and we didn't want to screw down new pews and anchor them in the floor, or use the metal legs and scratch up our a brand new floor we just put down. So it's not that I'm like anti-pew or anti whatever, but we're talking from a practical standpoint. Carrying 250-pound pews out, finding somewhere to store them while we redo the floor, putting them back in and bolting them down. It's kind of not practical.
Yeah.
So we sold them, and we're buying new chairs right now. We're sitting in like white chairs, and thankfully this isn't going to drop until after Sunday, so people won't be too shocked. But when they hear it. But no, it's good. It's we're trying, and that's I think that's one of the advantages that I see, especially in an urban area, that we as replanters have. That sometimes planners don't. I have a good friend of mine who's planting just a city or two up, and they rent from another church. But the issue is you're at the beholden of who you're renting from.
Right.
Like they had to move their service time twice because of the church, the service in front of them, and they have to work around the other church's schedule. And then, especially in the urban areas, there's no way the city is going to give a church a tax-free multi-million-dollar piece of property.
Exactly.
I mean, we have 2 lots here. We sit on 2 lots, and the city of Boston doesn't get to collect taxes on it, and so there's no way that they're going to zone for that to happen again.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm in the sticks, as Eric said. I'm West Sutton. Like the church is in Sutton, but much like Charlestown is a neighborhood of Boston, I'm in West Sutton, which is a village of Sutton, and that is the country farm sticks area. It's nice, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. Reminds me of Maine, where my wife is from.
I mean, there's no cell phone service, if that tells you. You lose cell phone service at Don's Church.
We're working on it. The town is working on it.
If that tells you anything.
But we have 2.5 acres. We have our own property, but much like in many revitalizations, the building is in need of repairs. And when you only have a small amount of people giving, funds are limited. My wife and I, the trustees, just let us know this past Sunday, we've given close, if not over, $2,000 ourselves to that funding to get the building back up, and we're still a far ways off. We still have to redo the downstairs, which is our children's ministries area. So, revitalization isn't always for everybody. In fact, we're going to go through the 5 types of revitalization. And I will give credit where credit is due. This list is based off of one that Mark Clifton and Dr. Tom Rayner have done. We've changed some of the words and some of our understanding. Just so you know, they use 2 terms. They use replanting and revitalization, and in truth, they're 2 different sides of the coin. They're the same coin, but 2 different sides. These 5 things, there's 2, I would say, are for replanting, 2 for revitalization, and 1 which is both.
Well, let's define those. So revitalization is a church that understands they're in need of kind of switching their direction, and they make that switch. Mm-hmm. While they're, I would say it's not generally not in a healthy time. Like you don't go, hey, we have a healthy church. Let's change some stuff up. But it is, some stuff that needs to change that you notice in the time. And then the flip side of that would be a replant, which is what both of us are doing. And when you go to a church that is heading towards the grave, that's heading towards shutting its doors, unless something changes. And now, people always think it has to do with paying the bills and paying the money. Fortunately, we're in a place where our church has some money in trust, which is able to kind of help us go. And there's a lot of churches that are in that boat that have money in trust that can kind of, keep alive for a while. But I would say just because you can pay the bills for 10 years, wherever you're at, that doesn't mean that you're not dying anyways, just because you can pay the bills. I mean, that's, cool, you can pay the bills. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not heading towards death anyway. So let's make sure people understand. The revitalization is a church that you just kind of need a switch in direction,
right? Like
a shot in the arm, so to speak. And then a replan is if something doesn't happen, like we're gonna,
the doors are gonna shut. This is gonna become, and it is in Massachusetts, where Eric and I are from. There are many churches. In fact, there's a historical church in New Bedford that closed. It was famous for many people that had called that church home. Closed, and now it's a nightclub.
Wow.
In fact, its most infamous person is Lizzie Borden, who called that church home. But that place is no longer a church building. It is a nightclub, and that's what happens. Like Eric was saying, he has 2 plots of land here in Boston, and I mean, we're talking millions of dollars that this facility could be sold for. And we're not thinking you're not thinking, we're thinking souls versus money, but that's what you're up against. So when we go into this...
Well, that's where we were at. You gave how you became there. Like, I stumbled into this thing. Mm-hmm. I had a couple friends who were, I had a friend who was planting a church here, and our church was renting out to another church at the time. And I was actually preaching at one of those services. And my friend who had been here planting had built a good relationship with the people of First Church, and he was in a meeting with them and let them know that he was moving back to the state that he's from. Well, right when I was like literally on my way to get up and preach, and my friend came up to me and he's like, "Hey, by the way, First Church wants you to be their pastor. What do you think about that?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm about to preach in like 2 minutes. Like, what? Are you kidding me?" I don't know what to say to that. But before that, before we First Church started renting to some other entities, we were there was a charter school who was trying to buy the property. And have this as a charter school.
Yep.
So that's that's the reality of things, and even from what Mark Clifton was saying was that the majority of churches that close aren't like your area. They're more like my area. Mm-hmm. The majority of churches that are closing aren't rural locations. It tends to be in places of 250,000 or more. So it's more like where common sense would suggest it would be the rural churches
right
in the middle of nowhere that couldn't pay the bills, but in fact it's more churches like where we are. And the biggest issue with that is once this property ceases to be a church, we'll never get another building I mean, obviously God can do anything, so I'll put that caveat in. But minus a miracle of complete intervention, once we lose areas in the city that were once churches, we'll never get them back.
Yep.
Like that's.
I mean, I was on my way here today. I was driving by a church that had closed. It's now an apartment building complex, but that church, when it closed, they took the stained glass windows and deeded those to the church that I served for 11 years in youth ministry. So that's still going on, but it's a sad thing that you drive by there. This building looks like a church. It's not white anymore. That's the thing. You know, we see these churches, these church plants coming up, and we do need church plants. Don't misunderstand Eric and I. Like we've said, we both come from church planting backgrounds. We know and understand the need for church plants. We love church plants, but revitalization is also a much needed thing, and this is where God's put us. So with that, let's just jump into these 5 types real quick before we close out this episode. So we have 5 types of revitalization and one we don't want to see. There's 1 type, so there's 6 really. But the first type of revitalization we're going to look at is relocation. Now, relocation is interesting because that's where a church keeps its name but sells its assets to become essentially a plant or replant. And usually when they realize that the members are not, usually happens when they realize that they're in the community, but they're not attracting people from the community. So, in other words, like they might be all Anglos in a community where there's a lot of Latinos, and they're not bringing in the Latinos, and so things that they're doing just aren't attracting. They might even try to start a Spanish service or something like that, and it's just not working. So they realize that maybe their time there is done, and they'll sell to a Latino church maybe, or a church that can bring in the community closer together.
Right. We actually have a little bit of this here. Is that we have a lot of folks who've been in this church for decades, their whole lives, and some of our leaders I inherited, neither one of them actually live in Charlestown anymore. They both live. The closest one is Peabody, and so it's so you see that happen is that with changing demographics and people moving and people leaving the urban flight, is that you see people, especially more to the urban area. I think is where you see probably more of this, is that the community, the church ceases to reflect the community, and so I think that's what we're talking about with this. The next one's leadership. Mm-hmm. So the church leadership realizes their vision no longer works for the church, and after prayer decides it's better to bring in fresh blood. So
yeah, and that would be sort of where First Baptist Sutton was. They had the pastor that was there 20 years, and really just as the membership came down and he was trying to work a full-time job, he really was losing the energy. He was almost 70 when he retired, but a lot of the stuff, like there was no reaching out to the community, there was no energy to do anything. Ministries that they had that were needed shut down. So like when I went there and I preached and they did the 20 questions that usually public committees do, I gave them a vision for this is what we need to do. We need to reach the community. We need to be able to really become a light, become a beacon again for the community. Make the church be there to share the gospel with the people, but also be there in the community. Like one thing that churches tend to do is they either focus too much on community outreach and they become very socially aware but very gospel poor. Other churches are gospel rich, but they don't do anything for the community, so they become very inwardly focused. And that's kind of the situation I'm in now. I've been there almost a year, and you do a lot of discipleship from the pulpit when you don't have much. And so I know I'm not going to attract too many people into the church with the way I have to preach right now, because that's really where I'm getting the discipleship for 100% of my flock.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm seeing those people, like as I talk with them, they're sitting there and they're starting to get it. They're starting to fall in love with Jesus again. They're like, like the biggest question a few months ago was, how do we evangelize? How do we share the gospel? So this is stuff that they hadn't done. This is stuff that, a lot of stuff that they wanted to do in the community to become part of. Like, one thing we became part of this past December was Chain of Lights, which was the Sutton did has a community Christmas time type of setup. Brings the people together for the day. They go around to key spots, and so we opened it up. We offered free food. We offered a whole bunch of free things, free concert, and like the people couldn't understand why we were doing this for free. We were just like, Jesus loves you. You know, it's his season. You know. And so it brought in there were people that were asking, and so one thing that we did is we passed out a postcard for the free movie night that we were doing the next week, and then the postcard also had an invite to Christmas Eve service, because Christmas Eve was Sunday on the 24th,
Right.
And we got a good response. Now, not many people stuck.
I'll say, let me jump in on that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the mistakes that we make, because we're a leadership too, as well. I'll kind of jump in on our what ours looks like, but let's talk about that for a second. How many times do we do events, and then we expect like the floodgates to open the next day?
Right.
I mean, let's be honest about that. People, we just did. I mean, those of you guys who don't know, we're recording this the Saturday after Easter, so. We're not doing this live, by the way, when you listen to this. But we're recording this the Saturday after Easter. So we had an event the day before Easter. We did at First Church, and we had several hundred people show up. Tons of people, and people loved our event. They spoke very highly of it. We got a good response, and we had a handful of visitors on Easter. So we have to make sure we get this idea that yes, events are awesome and it's great that we can, but we have to remember. It's our privilege to serve the community, and that needs to be kind of our focus, because we get this idea that if we go serve the community, then that's going to in turn grow our church. But the problem is that there's a heart issue with that. Is that the issue should be that we have this opportunity to have a movie night to serve the community. We have this opportunity as a church at First Church to serve the community by doing an Easter egg hunt, doing a big event. And if we're honest, you have some ministry experience. I have a little bit of ministry experience. Between the two of us, I think we're okay. People who don't go to church don't just show up to show up.
Right.
They show up because somebody invites them. So if you're a church member and you're listening to this, invite people to your church.
Yeah.
Like, people will come. Number two, people show up when their lives fall apart. I mean, that's the issue. Is that people come in crisis when they move, a crisis, something happens. That makes them go,
exactly.
Well, what's going on? There has to be something more.
Biggest evangelical event that happened in the last 20 years, sadly, was 9/11.
Yeah.
9/11 happens. We have this horrible event in this country, and the churches, even that night, that Tuesday night, I remember, it's our Pearl Harbor, our generation's Pearl Harbor. That night, it was a Tuesday that it happened, and that night, I remember churches were open. My church that I was serving at the time was open, and we had like about 60 people in there.
Right.
And that was the thing. It was a evangelical event, really, because they were in there wanting the answers. Why did this happen?
Why does this happen? Yeah, and that's the case. We get so. I'm not saying don't do events. We love doing events. Like the running joke with Sarah and I is that we're party planners. Sarah's my wife, by the way. That we do an incredible job of putting events on, and we're very big on doing them well, but. That's not. I mean, if you hear this, please hear this. That's not going to open the floodgate to your church. No. It's going to get your name out there. It's going to let the community know that you love and that you care about them. But you guys have to legitimately love and care about your community, and not just try to use these events to leverage people in your door. Because people know that's what if that's what you're doing. People know that,
right? And
they're going to respond likewise. I really see it, and God's really changed my heart. I'll be honest. I mean, I'm going to stop because I'm going to start preaching here in a second. But God's really transformed my heart in this. Is that I now see these events. Yes, it's cool. We get our name out. I mean, people. So talking about this leadership. So First Church was a mainline church, which means that our church didn't really preach Jesus. They didn't really preach the gospel. So you talk about leadership. It goes from that to a very gospel centered, very. I'm very creative when it comes to my sermon series names. Like right now, I'm preaching through the book of John, so we call our sermon series John. My my first sermon series was I preached the First Peter. So if you're listening, you could probably go ahead and guess what we call that sermon series. If you can't put it together, we call it First Peter.
Mine is currently off. I do a actual series called Empty, but prior to that, it's Mark.
Right. I mean, so nobody's going to accuse us of being creative, but we're very, very gospel centered, very, very in the Word, from the Word. I mean, what's the point of what
we're expositional?
Yeah, there we go.
Style.
Expositional. There's your big fancy Bible college word. But so we went from literally not having a vision. People thought our church was closed. I can't tell you how many people have stepped in the door. We also, when we used to have two 12-step groups that meet here. One of them just had their last meeting. They closed down. It wasn't on us. Like, we're still open. We're still actually talking about letting another meeting come in and use their slot. But so many of them were like, I didn't know this building was open. I mean, I remember a girl in particular who's come to our church a couple times was like, I've lived in Charlestown my whole life, 40 years. And this is the first time I've ever stepped foot in this building. And you just think, man, and so we're at the point where we do events and we open the doors and we try to serve just so people know we're here. And that's the thing is, a lot of times you guys we have to realize when it comes to revitalization or replanting that we're not going to get that easy, boom. They're here. Like it's almost like a ministry of presence. Almost, you've got to get in the community and let people know that you're around, that you love, that you care about them. And you genuinely have to. Like, you have to love and care about the community because that's what God commands us to do. And so we've had a leadership very similar just because we had no decade. We had no vision. We had no direction. We really weren't going anywhere. So we had a leadership as well and even a doctrinal shift. So, all right, I'll stop because we're
this is going to end up being a double-sized.
Well, here's the problem with this leadership one. The rest of them we'll go through pretty quick because leadership is really where both of us are at.
Right.
So that's the case.
So the third type we're going to look at, and this one I actually have experience with my last church that I served in prior to First Baptist. It's a merger. It's when a dying church offers its building and assets to a church plant or another church that is growing in the same community. Usually the churches agree to keep or change the name to the younger church's name or become a new church altogether. And so basically, if it's like the church is First Baptist Church of Sutton and it's got a name and everything, they'll keep that name. There's just a lot of new blood that comes in. There's a lot of push to get that out into the community and for people to understand that, hey, we're alive, we're here. But if the church has had a bad name, this is sort of what happened with the church I came from, Meeting House. Meeting House was a church plant in Taunton. I'm not going to name the church that we merged with because I just don't want it. It's right. Bad. But we had a church that approached us. They were down, I think, to like 20, 25 people. They knew that they were going to close their doors probably in the next 6 months. They have this beautiful building. I believe it seats about maybe 350 people. We were in a storefront, and it just worked out perfectly. So within probably about 8 months of having two services, one in Taunton, one in Middleborough, which is the next town over, we eventually announced that we were going to be one church, one place, and all of a sudden it just took off. All of a sudden the old church's name was off all the signage. We had banners that we put up with the Meeting House name, and the community started to come in. Before we knew it, the community was more open to what was going on. Like, they knew that there was some new blood there. There was good things. We had the police chief at the church helping us get out into the community. And now, like I said, there was 20, 25 people from the old church there. There was about 40, 50 at Meeting House at the time. So you figure we're about 60 people maybe. And I believe last Sunday, I have family that still goes there. They said there's about 150, 200 people there now.
Oh, one of my college roommate, one of my best friends, he's actually on my oversight board. His church did this out in Michigan, and it's out in Flint. Him and we were talking about this podcast the other day, and we were joking is that he's been there for like 5 years. Actually, he has been there for 5 years, but we were joking about how in some ways where we're at First Church we're a little ahead of him, and some ways we're a little behind. I mean, it's weird how Revitalization. So they did a merger. They took two churches that were dying, merged them, went to the nicer building, sold the other building, much like the relocation, to an ethnic church that matched the population where his old building was. So it was just kind of interesting how that all kind of worked.
Right.
So it is. I think that's a good one, and I think if you're a dying congregation, that the idea of leveraging your building to a growing church plant, I think is a better kingdom mindset.
Yeah,
Than,
and it's much better
than
because,
holding on.
like we were saying, for a lot of church plants, it's becoming harder for them to find property. Like you said, there a lot of even though it is illegal, I will put that out there. It is illegal for a government to say no to a church acquiring land, but in order for that to happen, there's got to be discussion among city and town councils,
Right.
And that is starting to meet with a lot of push and pull now. So now it's becoming more reasonable for people that when they want to, when a person is in Bible college, finishing seminary, and wants to plant a church, more and more people are saying, well, look at this church over here, they need fresh blood.
Right. Oh, that's our pipes banging.
Oh, okay.
You guys have heard that. We're actually, because we're in the bunker, our pipes are kind of old, and when the heat kicks on, they bang and stuff like that. Yeah, that's it freaks people out. The next one is the acquisitional. It's when a multi-site church takes control of an existing body, and that body switches from being community denomination church or whatever it's called to a multi-site church. We actually had a church approach us about that. I'd been here for about 2 or 3 months. And we actually had a church approach us about becoming a campus of their church, and our leadership very quickly was not interested.
It's definitely not for everybody to be that, but in some cases it does work. Like I know a couple of pastors from multi-sites, and I know that they look for certain things with churches, and one thing that they do want is they want the people there to be in agreement that this is going to be the best thing for both bodies.
Right. I'll be honest. I'm not a huge multi-site fan, so that's part of it. And I listen. Some of my favorite pastors that I like to listen to are multi-site, but my favorite, the guy I listen to, Chandler, they're actually going away from multi-site. So
yep.
I'm not a big fan personally. So that helped part of my decision as well. So let's look at the last two so we can kind of gain some momentum.
Okay. So the last one is organic, which is in some ways, even though we are in leadership, that's also in some ways where our churches fall.
I was thinking the same thing too.
And it's the slowest of all the processes. Like a merger and acquisition have the highest success rates, but organic, it has the lowest success rate. There's only 2% historically of these churches that succeed, but there are recent movements within surveys showing that this is growing, because these churches are starting to realize that, hey, we've got to change in order to survive.
Well, that's even where we're at. We, like I said, we just literally, this is a fresh wound. We just literally sold our pews. Like the last half of our pews went out a couple hours ago.
They did.
And so I have two holdovers who are part of our administrative team here at First Church, and as we made the decision to do it, the big line was, well, it's not 1957 anymore, and what worked in 1957 isn't going to work in 2018. Mm-hmm. Now, methodologically, if you were preaching the gospel and preaching Jesus in 1957, well, that's going to work for the next 2,000 years because it's already worked for 2,000 years. So hear me on that. But what I'm saying is methodology, and even still, I'm not saying pews aren't going to work. Pews are going to work just fine. We're just in a place where that's not what's best for us specifically moving forward. And we're a historic church, and they're not our original pews. If they were like our 1840 pews, I probably wouldn't have wanted to part with those.
Yeah,
but
I have pews that are 1829, and but the seat for the seat is very small.
It is.
It was designed for a smaller person.
Yes.
And that has been something that of talk among my congregation right now, my flock, because we're sitting there saying, eventually we want to go to pew chairs. We want to take these pews out, but there's that historical value, and
Right.
and a lot of, like, I know a church in Raynham, Massachusetts. They actually they were trying to keep the pews, the same type of pews as we have, but eventually what started happening was the people would go in, and of course a bigger person like ourselves would go in there, sit, you'd hear crack. They'd have to be fixed, and what they found out is it would cost too much. Even this church went to the National Historic Register to see, hey, if we put the church on they wouldn't even pay for the pews because
Oh, wow.
it was just going to be too much. So they just took the pews out, and of course the Historic Register says if the outside stays the same historically, that's fine. The inside you're free to change, and our inside's already changed quite a bit,
Right.
So it's not like it would be sad for us to take out the pews in some ways, but in other ways, everybody just, they're uncomfortable. We want chairs. It's part of the plan, but we have to grow and get a budget to do that.
Yeah, we covered like 75% of our cost
So,
with a sale, so that was helpful.
but that's part of the organic growth,
Right.
is people seeing that things cannot stay the same. The reason why many churches die is because they want to stay, like Dr. Tom Rainer talks about walking into a church, and him and the people that he's with will play the game. What year is it? They walk into a church.
I remember that episode. That was funny.
And it's like 1971, and I remember them talking with a guy, and he was saying, like, his daughter, while he was interviewing for the pastorate, his daughter thought that the nursery was a sale, like a yard sale, basically, because all the stuff that was in the nursery was that. So anyway, those are the 5 main types of revitalization. It's relocation, leadership, merger, acquisitional, and organic. There is one dishonorable mention we want to talk about. And there was really no way we could name this any other way. We want to be sensitive to people out there. I know people. We're not going to name the denomination that
has made this famous.
Yeah, it was
or infamous.
Yeah, it was notorious when this happened about
I like that word
20,
better.
25 years ago. But it's basically called a hostile takeover. Now, what happens with this is there is an existing body. This denomination, this particular denomination, would start churches in cities, and then they would find churches like Eric's church or my church or maybe one of your churches, and they would start sending people to that church. And it would be little bits of feed, and then I'm gonna tell somebody to come in. Within 6 to 8 months now, you have all these new people in this church. They're becoming members, and then they voted the pastor out. They put a vote of no confidence in because they became voting members. They outnumbered the existing members, and they would then call their pastor of their plant or whatever you want to call it into that church. And so then these churches were becoming this particular denomination's church. I believe it was Clifton, maybe, or maybe even Jim Harrell, who's director of Overseed, told us about this not too long ago. And so, but that is not a healthy thing. We don't want to see that. We want to see churches living and thriving, and I don't even know how God could bless a church that went through that. And in fact, even a while ago, it seemed like First Baptist Sutton, I know at least twice they had two different churches try to do that prior to me coming in. Luckily, the pastor and the leadership there were aware of what was going on, and they just, by God's grace, put the kibosh on it.
Well, yeah. So that's we've actually changed our church constitution because of this, because this was a concern that we had as far as people coming in. Because I mean, realistically, our old constitution required 15 members to be able to vote as a quorum, and we couldn't even pull that off. So we changed our church constitution, and it takes a whole lot to remove me at this point. It actually has to go to an outside entity, and they help. And that was by design. That was so nobody could come in and throw me out or any pastor that follows me, as well as if there is a because let's be honest, most people in church fight over silly things that aren't even like doctrinal things. So it kind of helps prevent that. So we've done that, which is, I mean, maybe you're listening to this, maybe you're not in a place where you can change the Constitution to try to help that. Though that is a recommendation that I would have, because it does kind of prevent some of that stuff. But not a fan of that either. I mean, it is a danger. And we were at risk for that for a while.
Yeah, it's not. Like I know. Like I've said, my church it had it, but luckily in its constitution there were those I don't know what we could call fail-safes, basically fail-safes that protected the pastor that was there from getting voted out, and those people left. But that is sadly what happens. People know that. Again, it goes back to not being able to acquire land. And so a lot of these churches, like I'm close friends with a pastor from that particular denomination who totally dislikes that is there, that is what they did. And, he doesn't understand. He has a tough time, I think, understanding. I won't say a tough time, but he does not like it when a church plant is going into a neighborhood or town that really doesn't need it, when there are dying churches there. And why is there nobody particularly going into those?
Right.
And so that goes back to the need for revitalization. Being able to come in and revitalize and help a dying church basically come back alive. We serve a God who sent his son. Like we said, we're coming in a week after Easter, where we celebrated the greatest victory over death, where Christ was resurrected back to life. If we serve a God who does that to his own son, the Son of God, he can do that to any church.
Amen.
So that is going to do it for our first episode. I hope that if you like this, please subscribe. We are going to be trying to do this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, but we hope, we wanted to just say this, that this is going to be a real-time situation too. Like Eric said, he's 3 years into this. I'm just about a year into this. A lot of guys hear the success stories. There's not that many revitalization podcasts out there going on, and this is going to be something that we hope, if we're having a tough week and we come in and we discuss what's going on, you're going to know that, hey, tough weeks happen, good weeks happen, but overall it's all to the glory of God. Have a good day.
So whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm ready. We got this.
Okay. I'll be the color guy. I'll let you start. I'll be the cutter out.
Shit.
Bam!
Ow, my ears. Dude!
I'd be a great sports commentator. Could you imagine that?
You just see.
Then I like,
Yeah. Oh, so it's just like it's like this thin line. Also, just go.
dude, I wasn't even going loud.
Anyway.
As for Mr. Microphone as a kid, my parents were like, "You have a Mr. Microphone." It's